Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are wading into a truly universal modern dilemma.
Yeah, this is one I think almost everyone feels.
It really is. Our source material defines it so well, not as some huge catastrophe, but as the steady, constant erosion caused by grinding regularity. We're diving deep into the psychological toll of that repetitive work-home loop.
It's that cycle, the one almost every listener knows intimately. You wake up and it's not really because you're motivated, it's just inertia.
Right. The alarm goes off, work, the commute, you come back, sleep, and then you do it all over again.
And the sources we looked at, they really focus on this quiet dread that creeps in. You realize there's no great tragedy, no disaster, only sustained, unchanging regularity.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately because that distinction is so crucial.
It is.
We're not talking about those intense, acute sufferings like, losing a job, a serious illness, a big betrayal. Those are moments of high drama.
Right. In those moments, you know exactly what you're fighting. There's a clear enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're discussing something far more insidious, something the sources call a profound confusion. If there's no actual crisis, why does it feel like life is subtly draining away? What is the Stoic diagnosis for this specific feeling of erosion?
Well, Stoics would never classify this daily grind as intense suffering. Suffering, for them, usually implies a painful external thing being forced on you. What we're describing here, the sources call mental attrition.
Mental attrition.
Yeah. The work-home loop itself isn't actively killing you with pain. It drains you because despite being full of tasks and obligations, it just feels fundamentally empty.
Empty of purpose.
Empty of purpose, empty of inherent meaning.
That distinction is paramount. The loop isn't scary because it's heavy. I mean, we can usually handle heavy burdens for a while. It's scary because it feels hollow. And I think this connects perfectly to that striking quote from Marcus Aurelius you pointed out in the sources.
Oh, absolutely.
He says that humans collapse not from those rare traumatic events they occasionally face, but from how they live with the things that repeat every day.
Exactly. It's the daily small surrenders, the small concessions we make to laziness or cynicism. They accumulate over time.
Yeah, and that brings us to the core problem statement our listener is really facing. You're meeting your responsibilities, you're acting like a responsible adult, but quietly you're asking, if this just keeps going indefinitely, where is my life going? What's the point of all this consistency?
And the usual self-help answer is what? Find your passion, escape.
Right, quit your job and travel the world.
The Stoics, though, they pivot entirely. They start with a much colder, more actionable, and, well, frankly, a more humbling question.
And that's the Stoic pivot, the fundamental difference in their whole approach. Instead of telling you to escape, they focus immediately on the one thing that no amount of external repetition can ever take away from you.
Control?
Exactly. Control.
Precisely. I mean, Epictetus would look at the most soul-crushing repetitive task on your calendar, that weekly status report or the long identical commute. And he just asks, in all that repetition, is there anything at all, still within your control?
And the sources are so clear on this. The real tragedy of the loop isn't the requirement to do the same thing over and over.
No.
It's living as if you have no choices at all within that repetition. It's the abandonment of your own internal choice-making.
That's the core of it.
So the mission statement for this deep dive is to really extract a practical philosophy from these sources. We are trying to unpack the Stoic framework that can transform this daily repetition from a source of existential dread into a rigorous training ground.
A training ground for achieving inner freedom, or sovereignty, as they sometimes call it.
Yes, sovereignty. It's about achieving a kind of mastery, even when the external landscape never, ever shifts.
That's the absolute goal. Stoicism grounds itself in this really uncomfortable premise that, repetition defines the majority of human existence. And if you can't find a disciplined internal posture for living within that regularity, then any fleeting moment of external freedom becomes kind of meaningless because you haven't mastered the self that actually occupies it.
Okay, so let's start by defining this subtle erosion more clearly. We've established the work-home loop's true threat is emptiness, not heaviness. We feel full of obligations, but we're totally devoid of any deeper purpose. Why is that regularity so uniquely scary compared to, say, a crisis? Why does the lack of newness feel like a threat?
Well, a crisis is a disruption, and a disruption often brings a strange kind of clarity, you know?
Yeah, it gives you a target.
It gives you a specific target for resistance. There's a clear story, us versus the problem. Regularity, on the other hand, demands this constant low-level endurance, and it forces you to confront where you actually get your definition of meaning from.
And if that meaning has to come from the outside.
Exactly. If meaning must come from external drama or novelty or praise, then consistency will, by its very definition, empty your life. It has to.
And that's where that Aurelius quote just lands with such force. People don't collapse from the rare events, they collapse from how they live with the things that repeat every day.
Right, because the consistency removes all the excuses.
All of them. You can't blame a one-off tragedy anymore. You can only look at your own daily choices.
And this chronic feeling is what the Stoics call mental attrition. It's not the explosive trauma of, acute suffering. It's the slow wearing down of your spirit when you lack any sense of forward momentum or purpose. Think of it like a stream constantly running over a rock. Eventually, the rock is worn away, not by a single huge blow, but by endless, gentle repetition.
That analogy of the stream and the rock is perfect. It really emphasizes how insidious this is. So if we feel this loss of agency, that we're just cogs turning in a machine, what does Seneca tell us about how to reclaim that internal position?
Seneca, he was addressing this problem long before the Industrial Revolution, and he offered this really profound insight about time. We always complain we don't have enough time, right?
All the time.
But he argued that suffering comes not from a lack of time itself, but from not knowing how to live in the time they have. The loop, paradoxically, is the great revealer of time.
Okay, here's where it gets really powerful for the listener. Because when you're distracted by new things, time feels fluid, it just flies by.
Right.
But in the loop, the same work, the same road, the same schedule, there is no climax to hide behind, there's no distraction. It's just you and your repeated actions in these clearly defined blocks of time.
Exactly. And in that predictable, unchanging environment, meaning cannot possibly come from external excitement. It's impossible. So it has to be generated internally. It must come from your internal stance.
So the core question becomes a philosophical challenge.
A daily one.
If today is identical to yesterday, same tasks, same circumstances, what within me can be different?
And Aurelius provides that immediate, direct, almost brutally simple answer, doesn't it?
Your judgment.
Your judgment. That single concept is the entire pivot point. The way you stand before those repetitive things is not required to be the same, even if the things themselves are.
So I can choose to judge the commute as a frustrating delay, a waste of my life. Or I can choose to judge it as 20 minutes of guaranteed solitude to think or to listen to this.
That is the essence of sovereignty. The loop kills, meaning when we outsource our entire sense of value to these uncontrollable externals. Think about modern metrics, results, recognition, promotion, annual evaluations.
All of it. We let our sense of worth just ride these volatile waves of external systems that we ultimately cannot control.
That outsourcing is so deeply ingrained in our culture. We're taught from childhood to measure life by the visible progress, the title, the salary, the awards on the shelf.
But the Stoic countermove, as described here, is to deliberately pull that focus back.
Retreat.
Retreat that focus to a very narrow, difficult, but true core.
Yeah.
Virtue in every repeated action.
It's this insistence that meaning is found in tiny, measurable integrity, moment by moment. It's not about achieving some grand ideal in the future. It's about right here, right now. Are you doing this job with focused integrity? Are you maintaining discipline when absolutely no one is observing you? Are you showing kindness when there is zero chance of reward or reciprocation?
These are all internal metrics.
Entirely internal. They cannot be taken away by an economic downturn, a difficult boss, or a global crisis. They're yours.
I have to admit, for the listener who is stuck in a genuinely tedious job, that sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to be some superhuman ethical engine running at full tilt 24/7 just to file TPS reports?
That's a fair point. But the key is that the Stoics actually narrow the focus, which makes it less exhausting, not more.
How so?
Epictetus's rule sums it up perfectly. You don't control the task or the result of the task. You only control the manner in which you do it.
The manner.
In a repetitive life, that manner, your focus, your honesty, your care, is the sole dwelling place of meaning. The repetitive action is simply the canvas. You're the painter.
So the repetition itself isn't the enemy. The enemy is the surrender of that internal posture, that commitment to quality. If I do the same task with full integrity today and then with half-hearted resentment tomorrow, I fundamentally change the value of my day, even if the external output looks identical.
Precisely. And that's the punchline for this initial diagnosis, meaning doesn't just vanish because life repeats itself. It vanishes the moment we choose to live repetitively without maintaining the posture of a person who has genuine internal sovereignty.
Okay, let's transition into the psychological deep end here.
Yeah.
We've established the loop is neutral, but it leads to despair. Why? The Stoics argue that the loop itself is neutral, and that feeling of emptiness is a human judgment we apply to it. If that's true, where does that heavy negative judgment come from?
The despair comes from a profound misalignment between our expectations and reality. The Stoics don't start with, how do I escape the loop? They ask, why does the loop cause you despair specifically?
Right.
And Marcus Aurelius noted that it's not the events that cause suffering, but the way we judge those events. The heavy judgment we apply is usually incredibly simple. It boils down to, this is not the life I want, and therefore this life has no value.
And that judgment is often tied to the modern expectation of climax, isn't it?
Oh, completely.
We've been trained by every narrative we consume, from movies to social media to self-help books, to believe that meaning has to be tied to these grand, climactic moments.
The sudden achievement, the massive promotion, the heroic breakthrough, the life-changing moment.
Yes, all of that.
And that expectation is absolutely deadly in a repetitive life, because life fundamentally doesn't operate on climax, it operates on endurance. 99% of your time is the space between the peaks.
So if you define meaning only by the peak moments, the vacation, the bonus, the launch party, then the repetitive days
They become meaningless voids, just filler. You're living only for the highlight reel, and the bulk of the film, which is your actual life, is discarded as unimportant.
That makes the emptiness not a natural state of the world, but a self-inflicted wound based on a totally incorrect metric for what a life is.
It is. And this leads us to what the sources identify as the most destructive psychological root of this emptiness: the danger of delayed value.
Delayed value.
Seneca was absolutely ruthless on this. He warned that those who live perpetually in hope for some idealized future, they view the present, the repeating reality of now, as just a waiting period.
And what does the repetitive present do to that waiting period?
It turns it into an illusion of infinitude. You just keep waiting for the later moment. When I have a better position, after I achieve X, once I finally get the courage to chase my dream.
We all know someone like that, or we are that person.
We are. And Epictetus provides the harsh, immediate reality check. He says, essentially, you are living your life now. You are not living in the ideal, hypothetical conditions that you imagine. You are living in this reality.
So, treating the present loop as only a means to an end, like a layover on the way to somewhere else, instead of the very place where life is actually happening, it severs the present moment from its own inherent value.
Exactly. You're basically living as if 80% of your life is filler content, just stuff to get through.
And that filler content, that repetition, eventually becomes the only context of your life.
And we also have to tackle a crucial confusion here. It's the confusion between meaning and the need for external stimulation.
Okay, yeah.
The loop certainly lacks novelty and surprise. We get bored. But Stoicism never, not once, defines stimulation or novelty as the source of meaning.
But we're so deeply addicted to it now. The constant drip feed of newness, new emails, new headlines, new social posts, that when the external environment becomes reliably dull, we just assume life itself is dull.
Exactly. The sources are clear. A good life doesn't need to be new. It needs to be lived correctly. Emptiness arises from living automatically, mindlessly, without internal ethical judgment, which is far easier to do when the stimuli are constant.
Like going to work like a machine, coming home out of inertia, resting is just simple avoidance.
That is a life without any internal choices being made. It's life on autopilot.
I want to stop here and challenge that for a second. If the human mind is naturally wired to seek stimulation and novelty, isn't Stoicism asking us to go against our fundamental nature? Is it even possible to find deep satisfaction in sorting the same spreadsheets or taking the same bus route year after year?
That's a really valid modern objection. The Stoics would counter that the mind's hunger for stimulation is an addiction, not a fundamental need for meaning. You satisfy that addiction by constantly chasing externals.
Okay.
You satisfy the need for meaning by focusing on internal quality. Think of it like nutrition. Stimulation is junk food. It gives you a quick hit, but it leaves you depleted and wanting more.
While internal integrity is.
It's the nourishment. It's slow, it can be boring, but it builds true strength. The loop just exposes our inability to sit with ourselves and derive value internally without a constant show.
That brings us to another huge modern psychological root, the stress of comparison.
The silent comparison.
With the seemingly interesting lives plastered all over our feeds, the perpetual travelers, the startup founders, the people who are always celebrating a new breakthrough.
And comparison forces us into actively negating our current life. We don't just endure our loop, we live in denial of it because we're always looking elsewhere, judging our reality against a curated fiction.
Marcus Aurelius had remarkably modern advice on this, didn't he?
It's amazing how relevant it is. He said, don't let your mind wander in the lives of others and neglect the difficult personal training you must do in your own life. Comparison is the ultimate self-sabotage. It forces us to wish for a life that is not ours.
And this comparison feeds into a total misunderstanding of what freedom is. We think freedom is the capacity to escape repetition, to hop on a plane, or to quit our job tomorrow.
The Stoic definition is antithetical to that. Freedom for them is not letting the mind be enslaved by what doesn't change.
So the routine is the constant.
The mind's judgment is the variable. The imprisonment isn't the commute. It's the surrender of your power to judge that commute as an opportunity for discipline, rather than just a frustration.
Aurelius said you can live freely, even with huge external limitations, if you maintain your power as judgment.
Exactly. The loop doesn't imprison us. The abandonment of our right to judge, to choose our response, that does a job for it.
So the essential takeaway from this section is that the loop doesn't make life meaningless. We make the loop meaningless by delaying the application of value to some imagined later. It requires us to stop focusing on what happens to us and focus solely on how we choose to live through what happens.
That's the core shift in perspective.
So if the problem is our internal judgment, then the solution must be a radical shift in practice. We need concrete mechanisms. This is where Stoicism really delivers, starting with the bedrock principle, the separation principle.
Right. And if we contrast Stoicism with modern self-help, this is the sharpest dividing line. It doesn't ask how to make life more interesting. It asks, in these unchanging, often boring circumstances, what do I still retain as mine entirely?
Which brings us back to Epictetus.
It always does.
Yeah.
He began all his teachings with that sharp distinction. What is controllable, your actions, judgments, reactions, and what is not.
And what's not controllable is basically everything else. Results, reputation, external evaluation.
And in the context of the repetitive work-home loop, that line is often totally erased because we habitually focus on the uncontrollable.
The job results, the supervisor's unfair evaluation, the slow pace of promotion, the traffic on the highway that never changes.
And because those things change slowly or not at all, we feel stationary, we feel stuck.
So the primary Stoic act, then, is a calculated withdrawal of meaning. We pull value away from the uncontrollable.
And we deliberately place it where no external force, no boss, no traffic jam, no recession can ever take it away. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly, you don't control the assignment you are given, but you control the manner and the focus with which you execute that assignment.
This means the loop becomes a prison only when we focus solely on the content of the work, the sheer volume of repetitive data entry, for example.
Right.
Stoics force us to focus entirely on the quality of the action. That shifts the internal dialogue immediately from, this is so boring, to, am I giving this my full, undivided attention?
Absolutely. The practical questions the listener should be internalizing are things like, am I working with complete focus right now, or am I distracted and resentful? Am I maintaining discipline in this task when no one's watching, or am I cutting corners? Am I reacting to inevitable frustrations with quick anger or with deliberate restraint?
The questions are tied to the same repeated action, but your honest answer to them is new every single day.
It is. The sources warn us against blaming the loop when we have, in their words, abandoned the only part of it that is still alive, which is our own intent.
This requires a total reorientation of how we measure success then. If we can't measure progress by external visibility, the promotion, the praise, we need a new metric. This brings us to the crucial mechanism of redefining progress, internal advancement.
Yeah, and society measures progress externally. Title, income, where you live. Stoics measure progress by the level of internal sovereignty you achieve. Marcus Aurelius called this silent advancement.
I love that phrase, silent advancement. Let's make this concrete. How does silent advancement manifest day to day for our listeners stuck in a repetitive loop? What should they actually be measuring?
You measure granular internal victories, things nobody else can see. Are you less irritable today than you were yesterday when you hit that inevitable bottleneck at work? Did you wait 5 seconds before replying to that terse email just to let your logic catch up with your initial emotion? Are you keeping those small promises you made to yourself, like going to bed at a specific time or reading for 20 minutes even when you're tired and no one would know if you skipped it?
No one congratulates you for waiting 5 seconds before responding.
Nobody. No one records your consistency in keeping small self-promises, but this accumulation, this slow, silent advancement, is what fundamentally fills the emptiness that the loop creates.
So every repetitive day stops being just another day and instead becomes another opportunity for a test.
A test of integrity, a test of tranquility, a test not to let your mind get dragged away by useless annoyance or cynicism.
This naturally leads us to the next mechanism, which is accepting the loop as a training school.
Right. We are constantly warned against waiting for ideal conditions to start living well. Seneca said the most wretched person is the one who expects life to be different, less repetitive, more exciting, before they agree to live decently now.
We hear people say that all the time. When I retire, I'll finally dedicate myself to philosophy, or when I get the management role, I'll be kinder to the staff.
The Stoic mindset is to treat the current repetitive situation as the training field, precisely because it is what is immediately available. Epictetus was so blunt about this, he said, "You are not training for a life later. This life right now is the exercise."
So if you can't practice virtue in the mundane, you certainly won't be able to practice it in a crisis.
Of course not.
So the endless line of the DMV isn't just a frustration, it's a test of patience. Fatigue isn't just tiredness, it's a test of restraint. Being overlooked for a raise isn't just an injury, it's a test of ego, forcing us to ask where we really place our true value.
Exactly. When you view it that way, the loop isn't a chain of identical days. It's a chain of identical opportunities to perform better or worse internally.
And this leads us to the fourth, and maybe the most difficult mechanism, the discipline of non-recognition. The sting of the loop often comes from the brutal realization that our efforts often go unseen, unrewarded, or just unappreciated. I have to raise the real-world friction here, though. If a listener's professional survival, their salary, their ability to feed their family, depends entirely on external recognition and validation, isn't telling them to ignore that recognition just a recipe for being taken advantage of and failing externally.
That is the essential conflict between the Stoic and the modern life. But the Stoic never advises incompetence or deliberate failure. You should certainly strive for external success where it's possible. But the Stoics ask, what happens to your internal stability when that recognition is denied? If you need recognition for your work to have meaning, you have surrendered your internal freedom to external forces, to your boss's mood, to the market, to sheer luck.
So the goal isn't to be incompetent. The goal is to decouple our sense of worth from the outcome.
Exactly. Marcus Aurelius emphasized doing the right thing even when no one is watching, and he treated the condition of being unobserved as the hardest exercise. The loop provides the ideal, non-judged conditions for refining your personal standards.
So you do the work with meticulous care for yourself.
For yourself, because that level of care is simply what a virtuous person does. And there, in that private commitment, meaning begins to take deep, unshakable root.
So the meaning of the loop emerges when we stop asking, what will this life give me? And start asking, what kind of person am I becoming in these perfectly repetitive, unglamorous conditions?
That's the shift. That's everything.
We often imagine Stoic tranquility, that deep, unshakable calmness, as something you achieve in solitude, maybe on a quiet hilltop somewhere.
Right, in a monastery.
But historical figures like Marcus Aurelius maintained it amid the chaos of constant war and plague. The loop is a different, slower kind of chaos, but it still serves as a perfect testing ground for resilience.
Tranquility is not the escape from the rhythm of life, but the steady maintenance of inner peace within it. And the loop's regularity is uniquely powerful because it gives you nowhere to hide.
There's no major event to distract your mind.
No novel drama to blame for your bad mood. The consistency just acts as a continuous mirror, reflecting every latent internal flaw you have. Your irritability, your accumulated fatigue, your unaddressed cynicism, your self-pity. It's the moment-to-moment experience that reveals who we truly are, which is often an unwelcome surprise. Precisely. Epictetus stressed that you cannot train tranquility when everything is favorable. It's when conditions repeat that your automatic negative reactions, the things you do without thinking, are clearly and repeatedly revealed. You realize, I become cynical exactly at 3:00 p.m. every day, or I always lash out when I hear that tone of voice.
And this revelation is the absolutely necessary starting point for inner freedom. You can't fix the corrosion if you don't first see it clearly. The consistency of the loop acts like a reliable diagnostic tool.
Another profound impact of the loop is how it strips away our pervasive illusion of control. Day after day, the repetitive nature of certain problems, the slow pace of a project, the unchanging temperament of a colleague, the market's total indifference. It forces you to accept that not every effort brings immediate visible change or guaranteed recognition.
This confronts us with a fundamental lesson in reality. Seneca observed that the greatest suffering comes from demanding that life respond fairly to our efforts.
And the loop teaches the opposite lesson. Life does not negotiate with your desires for fairness or immediate reward. It just is.
This confrontation forces a stark choice then.
Yeah.
Bitterness or maturity.
That's it. Bitterness is the continued, exhausting resistance against reality. Maturity is the adjustment of expectation, accepting the nature of things, and stopping the massive energy drain that comes from fighting what cannot be changed.
The mature person stops demanding good feelings and immediate reward with every single effort.
Right, and that acceptance is a huge mental energy saver, because suddenly you're no longer fighting the system, you're operating within it with wisdom. This allows for the training of what the sources call active patience.
Active patience. So this isn't passive resignation, like giving up.
No, it's not born from helplessness. It's an active choice born from clear discernment. What is worth my internal energy and what is not? Epictetus challenged us directly on this. He said, "You do not need to react to everything that happens during the day. Most of your daily reactions are superfluous."
I see this most clearly in the small, repeated annoyances. The notification sound, the habitually slow response time of a coworker, the small error that just keeps recurring. If we react emotionally every time.
Your mental and emotional state is completely depleted by the end of the day.
Yeah.
The loop is the perfect laboratory for selective response. It constantly presents the same low-stakes irritations, giving you hundreds of opportunities a week to practice restraint. We practice minimizing our emotional expenditure because our internal energy is finite. The Stoics are teaching us to prioritize where that energy is spent.
Save it for the genuine moral challenges not wasted on traffic.
Exactly. And finally, the loop mandates emotional discipline, doing without feeling. Because the loop is repetitive, it removes the possibility of waiting for motivation or excitement to strike. You just have to do the thing, regardless of how you feel about it.
Marcus Aurelius provided the guiding instruction here.
He did. Do your work as a human being born to do that work without needing special emotion. Most worthwhile, durable things in life, raising a child, maintaining a career, staying healthy, are done in a normal state without fanfare or motivational speeches.
And performing well in that normalcy builds long-term resilience.
It's everything. If you can do the right thing when you don't feel like it, your discipline is truly free from any external dependency.
So the deepest impact of the loop is that it forces a fundamental shift in focus. Away from the external world, which is unchanging, and back to the internal world, how we think, how we judge, and how we treat ourselves and others. The loop doesn't give us the solution, it just removes all our psychological hiding places so we can see the problems clearly.
That's a perfect summary.
The Stoic framework, for all its philosophical grandeur, it lives or dies based on its application in real life. We need to move beyond these abstract concepts. So let's talk about the three main arenas where the loop manifests: work, family, and our close relationships.
Absolutely. We'll start with work. In the modern workplace, the primary source of emptiness is this expectation that our job must fulfill our spiritual destiny.
Right. It has to be our passion.
The Stoic path offers liberation from that. The goal is not to magically love the job, but to treat it strictly as a moral exercise.
Epictetus' perspective is often seen as cold, but I find it incredibly freeing. He says, "You are not hired to find spiritual fulfillment. You are hired to do a job decently."
It is liberating because it removes the enormous pressure for the job itself to be inherently interesting, meaning depends entirely on the quality of self you bring to the work, not the work's inherent value. If you're stuck doing repetitive data analysis, the meaning comes from the honesty, focus, and diligence you apply to it.
Can you give us some practical examples of this moral exercise in action during a repetitive workday?
Sure. Think about the small daily acts of integrity. Correcting a tiny error in a report that you know for a fact no one else will ever notice. refusing to participate in habitual office gossip when everyone else is taking a break, keeping a self-promise to finish a tedious task with full focus, even though you could easily multitask and slack off.
So it flips the script.
It completely flips the entitlement script. Marcus Aurelius essentially asked us to stop asking, is this work worthy of me? And start asking, am I worthy of the work given? It transforms the most boring task into a moral testing ground.
Okay, next. Family. This is the character challenge. Family life is defined by repetition. The same chores, the same conversations, the same old conflicts and triggers. It's often more tiring than work precisely because of that intense emotional familiarity.
Family exposes our worst habits. We drop our guard and we use fatigue as an excuse for ethical slippage. Seneca addresses this by noting that you cannot control others' temperaments, your children's habits, or your partner's long-standing complaints. You only control whether you let yourself descend into pettiness or irritability because of them.
So the question is, how do we find meaning in this domestic loop?
It comes from conscious patience. These are the silent victories that preserve your character. For instance, your partner repeats the same criticism they always repeat. The victory is choosing, consciously, not to snap back with the easily spoken, damaging report that is already on the tip of your tongue.
The victory is refusing to use your work fatigue as an excuse for being disrespectful at home.
Yes. Or choosing to listen actively to a story you've heard a dozen times before rather than just zoning out. These small daily decisions are the foundation of domestic meaning, far more than some dramatic weekend getaway.
Finally, relationships, colleagues, friends, neighbors, the people we see again and again. This is the test of restraint. Familiarity, paradoxically, often makes us drop our standards of conduct.
We do. We assume because we know someone well, we don't need to apply the same ethical rigor we might with a stranger. Epictetus warned about this. Do not let familiarity spoil your character.
So meaning is maintained by upholding consistent standards of conduct, even when there's nothing new to discuss.
A non-perfunctory greeting. Maintaining active, present listening, even when the conversation is routine. Choosing timely silence over unnecessary, careless speech.
So the core lesson across all three of these arenas is the crucial role of small actions. Stoicism lives not in the rare dramatic decisions, but in the small, repeated choices we make when we think no one is watching, or when the task feels unimportant.
And Marcus Aurelius' summation is the perfect capstone for this section. He said, "Your life is the sum of the small actions you deem unimportant." The loop exposes this truth clearly. There is no special day scheduled to become a better person. There's only today, repeating just like yesterday. If you maintain integrity or restraint one small action at a time, the loop is not meaningless. It is the generator of your character.
Now we have to address the difficult, uncomfortable truth. If Stoicism is so effective at transforming the internal experience of repetition, why do the vast majority of people fail to live this way? Why can't most of us endure sustained regularity without, well, self-destructing?
Because the modern person, and arguably the human being throughout history, has grown dependent on constant external stimulation, on change, and on validation through recognition. Marcus Aurelius warned that the worst slave is the one who cannot stay still with himself. The loop removes all external distractions, and when that happens, the untrained mind rebels violently against normalcy.
When the mind can't latch onto a new external crisis or a new hope, it just manufactures its own internal chaos.
It creates false crises, spikes of anger, waves of self-pity, a persistent, baseless dissatisfaction, precisely because it cannot accept the sheer ordinariness of reality. Epictetus was incredibly blunt about this. He said, "If you cannot endure the ordinary, you cannot endure freedom."
And what did he mean by that?
True freedom, for the Stoic, is not doing what you like. It is not being forced to seek external stimulation simply to feel valuable or purposeful. The loop is a relentless daily test of this capacity.
And when people fail this test, they often fall into one of the two traps. The first is perpetual escape, constantly changing the externals.
Rapid job changes, shifting partners, moving cities, always looking for a new narrative.
And these changes are almost always used as
Psychological pain relievers. The Stoic question is surgical here. Are you running to a destination, or are you simply running from yourself? If the internal mind doesn't change, if you haven't mastered your judgments, the new environment, however much flashier, will simply become another loop, and perhaps an emptier one than the last. You carry your mind with you.
The second trap is internal paralysis. This is operating purely by inertia. You don't change jobs, but you're also not truly living. Just letting the days drift by as background noise, existing in a sophisticated state of emotional numbness.
The sources call this a sophisticated form of slavery. You are externally free, you can choose your sandwich or your TV show, but the inner self has entirely surrendered its judgment and its vitality. Marcus Aurelius powerfully warned against letting your mind die before your body.
And that is the ultimate submission to the loop.
It's letting repetition turn you into a non-thinking machine.
So, the sign of sovereignty is the ability to endure the loop without succumbing to either self-deception or paralysis. And only those who have truly relocated their source of value internally can achieve this.
Right. They measure progress by metrics like tranquility, internal discipline, and integrity, things that require no audience. They do not need external validation or a good, exciting story to tell their friends about their life.
Epictetus understood this deep need for validation.
He really did. He said, if your life needs a story to be worthy, you will never be truly free. Stoic freedom is not about choosing your circumstances. It's about the unshakable ability to live correctly in whichever circumstances you find yourself.
The loop is the harsh test because it removes all the external hiding places. There's no sudden achievement, no immediate crisis, no ready excuse. It simply presents the same environment and asks, day after day, are you maintaining your quality of character?
And this leads to the cold choice that every listener has to face. You either live by change and therefore accept constant instability, volatility, and the need for external validation, or you choose to live by internal quality, accepting sustained regularity as the condition for genuine stability.
Only the latter can't be taken away from you.
And the uncomfortable truth is that many people prefer the illusion of a fragile external freedom.
This doesn't sound like a promised land in the traditional sense, endless beaches or financial freedom. What exactly does Stoicism promise us then for mastering this repetitive life?
It promises not a different life, but a different internal posture within the same life. Marcus Aurelius never promised things would go well. He simply advised, be mentally prepared for things to go wrong or for things to stay exactly the same and still live decently.
So the Stoic promised land isn't a place, it's a state of mind.
It's a state of mind where the loop loses its power to destroy the inner self. It is a life where today's actions do not betray your own highest standards.
And the sources list 3 markers of having achieved this resilience. First, an uncompromising mind.
This means refusing to negotiate conditions before you act virtuously. A Stoic doesn't say, I will be decent to my difficult relative if they apologize first, or I'll work with integrity when I get a better job.
So they ask,
am I working with integrity right now? Am I behaving appropriately, regardless of how they're behaving? Virtue is practiced first, as a condition of existence, not as a reward for having good circumstances.
Second, not needing to justify life. We are so busy trying to optimize our lives to look good to others.
And Seneca stated that the one who lives well does not need to justify their life to anyone else. The loop causes despair because people feel they can't tell an exciting story about their monotonous reality. The Stoic rejects the need for that story entirely.
A repeated day lived with discipline, clarity, and kindness is enough.
It is sufficient. Your value is inherent, not narrative dependent.
And finally, peace without outcome. Tranquility comes from not staking the health of your soul on the results.
This is the ultimate act of acceptance. Marcus Aurelius advised doing your part, the controllable actions, the effort, the focus, and accepting the rest, the result, as the nature of things.
And the loop contains a vast majority of that rest, all the efforts that yield no immediate visible change.
By treating this lack of change as the default condition, the mind stops resisting reality and dramatically reduces bitterness and resentment.
So the eventual outcome is quiet and internally felt. The loop no longer frightens you because you are actively creating meaning through correct living, even when nothing changes externally. It's a quiet, personal, internal construction project.
You cease waiting for life to bring meaning to you, and you begin the daily task of generating that meaning by living well where you are standing. That's Epictetus's final instruction, applicable to any age. Don't look for a good life elsewhere. Live well where you are standing.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive. The core takeaway from all these sources, from Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, is that meaning is not defined by external changes. It's defined by maintaining character and internal mastery throughout the days that are exactly the same. It's a very quiet, powerful revolution.
It is. It's the shift from defining success externally, which is always volatile, to defining it internally, which is entirely stable. It is the realization that true sovereignty is found precisely in the places where we thought we were most constrained. The loop is not your cage, it is your training ground.
So here is the final provocative thought we want to leave you with to carry into your next cycle of repetition. If tomorrow is exactly like today, and the day after that is also exactly like today, will you still maintain your unwavering quality of character, even when no one promises anything more? Think about that as you face your next repetitive cycle, and remember that inner discipline is always unfailingly within your control.